I only climbed onto that roof to help my friend's aunt, but the way she smiled up at me that afternoon, like she saw something in me no one else ever had, changed everything. And when the rain came, and she didn't let me leave, I realized the roof wasn't the only thing about to break. I never thought helping out with a simple roof repair would leave a mark on me. My friend had asked if I could spare an afternoon at his aunt's place, just to lend a hand. I said yes without hesitation, tools in the back of my truck, a clear sky overhead, and the kind of work that usually clears the mind. Her house sat quiet at the edge of town, tucked behind a row of tall trees. It had the kind of charm you don't see much anymore: wooden shutters, a garden full of roses, and a porch that seemed to have listened to 1,000 conversations. I didn't think much of it at first. Not until she stepped outside. She was already in the garden when I arrived, pruning the roses, her back straight, movements calm and deliberate. My friend's aunt. Older, of course, somewhere in her 40s, but there was a kind of grace in the way she carried herself. She looked up at me when I called out a polite greeting, and then it happened. She smiled. It wasn't just a smile of courtesy. It was something steadier, something that reached her eyes. A smile that seemed to linger a second too long, as though she was measuring me quietly, trying to decide what to make of me. I told myself I imagined it, but even when I started climbing the ladder, I could still feel that look resting on me. The roof creaked beneath my boots, shingles warm from the afternoon sun. Sweat gathered at the back of my neck as I worked, the rhythm of hammer and nail almost soothing. Still, every so often I glanced down. And every time, she was there, sometimes leaning against the porch railing, sometimes standing with her hand shielding her eyes from the sun. Watching. Not intrusively, not uncomfortably, but with a kind of interest that made me strangely aware of myself. I caught myself working harder, straighter, more careful with each step. It's funny how presence alone can shape you. Her quiet attention felt like a weight, though not an unwelcome one. I could hear the soft sound of her sandals against the porch, the low hum of her voice as she spoke to the roses she was trimming. She was close, yet far enough that her presence didn't demand anything of me. But that smile, it stayed in my mind. There was warmth in it, yes, but also a question I couldn't name. She seemed both welcoming and distant at once, a woman who had lived enough to know what she wanted, yet careful not to show too much all at once. By the time I finished the first section of the roof, I climbed down the ladder, tools in hand, and she was waiting there. That same smile touched her lips again as our eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, I felt something stir. A kind of pull. I told myself it was nothing. Just gratitude. Just kindness. But deep down, I already knew I wasn't going to forget that smile. When I finally climbed down from the roof, my shirt clung to me, damp with sweat, and my hands were marked with dust and grit. I wasn't expecting her to be waiting for me at the bottom of the ladder, but there she was, standing with a glass of water in her hand, the condensation beating and dripping down her fingers. "Here," she said simply, her voice calm, steady. I reached for the glass, and in that small exchange, her fingers brushing mine, it felt like the moment slowed. Her touch wasn't deliberate, but it wasn't rushed either. Just enough to leave a trace of warmth on my skin long after the glass was in my hand. I took a sip, the water cool, sharp, cutting through the heat of the afternoon. "Thank you," I managed, suddenly aware of how close we were standing. She tilted her head slightly, studying me the way someone studies a painting, quiet, attentive. "You handle the tools well. Do you enjoy working with your hands?" It was an innocent enough question, yet the way she asked it made me feel as though she wanted to know more than the obvious answer. I nodded, trying to keep my voice even. "Yeah, there's something steady about it. You see the problem, you fix it. Doesn't always work that way with people, though." She laughed softly at that, a low, melodic sound that carried more warmth than the late summer sun. "That's true," she agreed, her eyes holding mine for a little longer than polite conversation required. We stood there on the porch, the air between us thick with something unspoken. She leaned lightly against the railing, her posture relaxed, but there was an attentiveness in her gaze, as if she was curious about the kind of man her nephew had called to help. I shifted, adjusting my grip on the empty glass, suddenly aware of the grit on my palms, the smudge of dirt across my forearm. Most women I knew, my age at least, wouldn't have noticed. Or if they had, they would have brushed it off with a quick comment, distracted by their phones or half-hearted conversation. But she noticed. She saw me. And that was what unsettled me most. We talked about the roof, about the stubborn leak that wouldn't give her peace every time it rained. But the conversation wandered, as conversations do when both people secretly hope it won't end. She asked where I learned carpentry, what else I did with my time. Her questions were never intrusive, but they carried weight, like she wasn't just filling silence, but listening, filing away each answer as though it mattered. At one point, I glanced up and caught her watching me, not the way someone watches a stranger, but with a kind of curiosity that borders on knowing. The afternoon light caught her profile, softening the fine lines at the edges of her eyes, and I thought to myself how strange it was that a simple smile from her had stayed with me for hours. When she laughed again at some small remark I made, it wasn't loud, but it filled the porch. For a second, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. I told myself not to read into it. I was just helping her out. Nothing more. But I couldn't shake the thought. It wasn't only the roof she wanted fixed. The afternoons slipped by in steady rhythm, hammering, adjusting, stepping back to check my work. I thought I'd have the roof patched before dark, but as I balanced on the shingles, I felt the air shift. The breeze picked up, cooler, carrying that heavy scent that always comes before a storm. I looked out across the trees and saw the clouds rolling in fast, dark and heavy. A few moments later, the first drops began to fall, tapping the shingles, soaking into the wood. "It's not safe up there now," her voice called from below, calm but firm. She was right. I climbed down, wiping the rain from my brow, and before I could suggest waiting it out on the porch, she opened the front door. "Come inside. You'll catch cold standing out here." Her tone wasn't a request, it was almost maternal, almost protective, but there was something gentler layered beneath it. I followed her in, the warmth of the house wrapping around me instantly. Inside, the world felt different. Quieter. More intimate. A faint scent of tea leaves and lemon drifted through the air. The soft tick of a wall clock filled the silence between us, steady and rhythmic, grounding me after the patter of rain on the roof. She motioned toward the couch. "Sit. I'll make us something warm." I lowered myself onto the cushions, noticing the lived-in comfort of her home. Family photographs lined the mantel, a few with her younger and smiling beside relatives. There were books stacked in a neat pile near the lamp, a half-finished crossword on the coffee table. It felt personal. Not just a house, but her world. She returned with 2 mugs, the rising steam curling between us. She handed me one, her fingers brushing mine again, so subtle, but enough to make me conscious of every point of contact. "Thank you," I said softly. She sat close, closer than necessary, the couch easily wide enough to leave more distance. Our shoulders weren't quite touching, but I could feel the warmth of her presence, the faint floral note of her perfume drifting with each quiet movement. We sipped in silence for a moment. The rain grew heavier outside, drumming against the windows. It was the kind of storm that forced you to slow down, to sit still. She broke the silence first. "My husband used to hate when it rained like this," she said with a small, wistful smile. "He'd worry about the leaks, about the garden flooding." Her eyes softened, but there was a shadow in them. "It's been years now, but storms still remind me of him." I glanced at her, unsure whether to speak or just listen. She didn't seem to need advice, only space to let the words live in the air for a moment. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, because it was all I could offer. Her lips curved into a small, tired smile. "Don't be. Life moves differently than we plan." She turned toward me then, her eyes lingering, searching. For what, I wasn't sure. The clock ticked. The rain poured. And in that living room, with her shoulder just inches from mine, I felt a closeness that had nothing to do with roofs or repairs. It was the first time I realized she wasn't just my friend's aunt, she was a woman, sitting next to me, letting me see the cracks in her strength. And I couldn't look away. The rain didn't let up. If anything, it fell harder, blurring the windows, filling the house with a constant low roar. The world outside disappeared in sheets of water, but inside, the silence between us became its own storm. She sat angled slightly toward me, her mug resting lightly in her hands. I had finished mine long ago, but I kept it cradled in my palms, pretending to need its warmth. In truth, it was an excuse to keep my hands steady. Her knee was only a few inches from mine. Too close to ignore. Not close enough to claim intention. I caught myself studying the space between us, wondering if she noticed it too. Every so often, her eyes flicked toward me, never long, just enough for me to feel the weight of her attention. When our gazes did meet, it was like neither of us knew who should look away first. Sometimes she did, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Sometimes I did, suddenly fascinated by the mug in my hand or the pattern of the rug beneath our feet. It was a strange kind of dance, this silence. A push and pull that required no words. At one point, she shifted slightly, setting her mug on the table. Her hand brushed the cushion between us, fingers relaxing against the fabric. My own hand rested not far from hers, and for a heartbeat I considered moving just enough to close the gap. But I didn't. Instead, my thoughts spun in quiet chaos. She was my friend's aunt. Older. Wiser. A woman who carried herself with a composure I wasn't used to. What would she think if she knew the way my chest tightened every time her shoulder leaned just a fraction closer to mine? The rain pressed harder against the windows, drowning out the world. It was only us in that living room now, sitting too close, saying too little. Her breathing caught my attention next, slow, steady, but softer than before. I realized she was nervous too, though she hid it better than I did. That realization changed something in me. Our fingers inched closer on the cushion. Not deliberate, not yet, but enough that the warmth of her skin brushed against mine. It lasted barely a second before both of us pulled back at once, a nervous laugh escaping me, a quiet smile tugging at her lips. She didn't fill the silence with words, and neither did I. That restraint made it heavier, sharper. I wanted to tell her I noticed, the way her eyes lingered, the way she seemed to lean closer without realizing it. I wanted to admit that I felt something here, something I couldn't quite name. But the words stayed locked in my chest. Instead, we sat there, side by side, suspended between what was proper and what was undeniable. The rain, the ticking clock, the dim light of the lamp, they were all witnesses to something that hadn't been spoken yet but was already alive in the room. And when her gaze met mine again, longer this time, steadier, I knew she felt it too. By the time the rain eased, the sky outside had gone dark. A soft drizzle lingered, the kind that clings to the air and paints the pavement silver. I gathered my tools quietly, slipping them back into the worn canvas bag I carried everywhere. The evening had stretched longer than I expected, and though part of me wanted to stay, the other part whispered that it was safer to go. I should head out before it gets too late, I said, standing from the couch. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. She was by the window, looking out at the street where droplets glimmered beneath the porch light. She didn't turn right away, just let the silence stretch. Then she faced me, her expression unreadable, gentle, but with something else flickering beneath. "You don't have to," she said softly. The words stopped me in my tracks. Not a command. Not even an invitation. More like a confession that slipped out before she could stop it. I hesitated, clutching the strap of my bag. "I don't want to impose." She stepped closer, her bare feet silent against the wooden floor. When she reached me, her hand found my forearm, light at first, then firmer, as though she wanted to make sure I didn't mistake her meaning. Her fingers were warm, grounding. "You're not imposing," she said, her voice steadier now. Her eyes searched mine, and for the first time, I saw something there that she had been holding back all evening: vulnerability, yes, but also a boldness that surprised me. I froze, unsure whether to move closer or retreat. My pulse thudded in my ears. This was the moment where everything could change. Her thumb brushed lightly across my sleeve, just enough for me to feel it through the fabric. That small, deliberate gesture carried more weight than any words. She paused, her voice catching slightly. "I don't want the night to end yet." The honesty in her tone unraveled me. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't idle curiosity. It was real, unguarded. I set the bag down slowly, the sound of it against the floor strangely final. My hands felt empty without it, and for a moment, I didn't know what to do with them. "You're sure?" I asked, though the answer was already written in her eyes. She gave the faintest nod, her lips curving into a small smile, soft, almost nervous, nothing like the confident one she had shown me that afternoon. This one was different. This one was personal. The house seemed to grow quieter around us. Even the rain outside felt distant now. Her hand remained on my arm, anchoring me there, refusing to let the space between us widen again. I realized then that leaving wasn't really an option anymore, not because she asked, but because I didn't want to. In that moment, I wasn't just her guest or her nephew's friend doing her a favor. I was a man standing in her living room, being seen for exactly who I was, and she was a woman who had just admitted she wanted me there. And for the first time all day, I let myself want it too. We didn't move right away. Her hand still rested on my arm, warm and steady, though her eyes flickered with the kind of hesitation that told me she wasn't entirely sure what came next. I wasn't sure either. All I knew was that the night had shifted. The air in the room carried a charge now, quiet, but undeniable. She let go first, though only to lead the way back to the couch. Neither of us spoke as we sat down again, closer this time, no polite distance between us. The lamp cast a soft glow over her face, highlighting the curve of her cheek, the faint lines around her eyes that spoke of years lived and lessons learned. She wasn't trying to hide them. That honesty made her even harder to look away from. For a while, we listened to the rain taper off into a gentle drizzle. The storm had passed, but in here, something stronger had taken its place. "I should tell you something," I said finally, my voice lower than I intended. She turned to me, her expression calm, though her eyes betrayed the slightest flicker of anticipation. "Go on." I swallowed, forcing the words past the tightness in my chest. "This afternoon, when I was up on the roof, I couldn't stop noticing you. The way you stood there, smiling. It distracted me more than I'd like to admit." Her lips parted, just slightly, as though the admission had caught her off guard. Then, slowly, a quiet laugh slipped out. Not mocking, soft, almost relieved. She leaned back against the cushion, her gaze drifting down to her hands in her lap before returning to me. "I noticed you too," she said, her voice no louder than mine. "From the moment you climbed that ladder." The confession settled between us like something fragile and precious. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then her hand found mine on the couch, tentative at first, her fingertips brushing across my knuckles. When I didn't pull away, she laced her fingers through mine. The warmth of her hand startled me with how right it felt. Firm yet delicate, her thumb tracing slow, absent circles against my skin. I exhaled, not realizing I had been holding my breath. She shifted closer, her shoulder touching mine now, her head tilting just enough to rest lightly against me. The weight of it wasn't heavy, but grounding. Her hair carried the faintest scent of jasmine, mixing with the lingering aroma of tea. "I didn't think I'd ever feel something like this again," she admitted quietly, her voice threaded with vulnerability. "Not like this. Not with someone like you." Her words sank deep, stirring something inside me I hadn't expected. I turned slightly, resting my cheek against the top of her hair, letting the closeness speak for us both. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. The intimacy was already complete in the way our hands held, in the way her head leaned against my shoulder, in the quiet truth we had finally spoken aloud. And for the first time that night, the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. It was ours. The rain had stopped sometime during the night, though neither of us noticed when. We stayed there on the couch, the lamp dim beside us, her hand still resting in mine, her head leaning against my shoulder. The clock ticked quietly, marking time we no longer cared to measure. I must have drifted off, because when I opened my eyes, the room was pale with early light. The storm had washed everything clean. Through the window, I could see the wet leaves glistening, the roses heavy with droplets that caught the dawn. The air felt different, still damp, but fresh, as if the night had rinsed away something more than just dust and dirt. She stirred beside me, her head lifting slightly, her eyes soft with the haze of sleep. For a moment, she didn't move, just looked at me as if she too was realizing the night had changed something neither of us could undo. "Morning already," she murmured, her voice quiet, roughened by sleep. "Yeah," I said, my own voice low. I didn't move to let go of her hand. Neither did she. Eventually, we both stood, reluctant, but knowing the day had begun. She disappeared into the kitchen, and soon the scent of coffee filled the house. I gathered my tools again, out of habit more than need, but when I stepped back onto the porch, she followed, carrying 2 steaming mugs. The sunlight broke gently through the clouds, warming the damp air. I set the ladder back against the roof, ready to finish the job, and she handed me a mug, her fingers brushing mine as naturally as though it had always been that way. "Don't work too hard," she said with a faint smile, the kind that carried more meaning now than it had yesterday. I climbed back onto the roof, hammer in hand, but my eyes kept drifting down to where she stood, watching. It felt different now, less like observation, more like quiet companionship. She wasn't just waiting to see the roof mended. She was there because she wanted to be. The work went quickly, the repairs finished under clear skies. When I climbed down, she was still there, holding her coffee, her gaze steady. For a moment, I wondered if either of us would speak about what had happened the night before. But when I set the tools aside, she stepped closer. "You fixed more than the roof," she said softly, almost shyly, though her eyes never wavered from mine. I didn't know how to answer that, not fully. So I did the only thing that felt right. I reached for her hand again, and she let me. No hesitation this time. Standing there in the morning light, her garden still glistening with the remnants of the storm, I realized I didn't need promises or declarations. What we had was quiet, tender, and new. And that was enough. I came to mend her house. But she had mended something in me I hadn't even known was broken. And as I left that day, I didn't feel like I was walking away. I felt like I was carrying something forward. Something worth holding on to.